Ready? Okay. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Henry Hale. I'm director here of IRES and also director of our Petroc program on Ukraine. And the Petroc program does a lot of things. We support Ukrainian scholars, including bringing a number of people here to be in residence, which is a great enrichment of the local intellectual community here, as well as we hope some contribution to supporting Ukrainians during this extremely difficult time. We do what we can to support research by Ukrainians and about Ukraine. But one of the most pleasurable things that we get to do, even in this very difficult time, is to bring in authors of great books to share their thoughts that go into the making of these books and to just in general discuss them with us. And I couldn't be happier than to have Blair Ruble here today with us to talk about his new book. Well, actually, they're all three up here. It's sort of the last of a trilogy. We'll have to ask if there's going to be more. Okay, great. Blair is just such an exceptional person. I mean, among other things, director of the Kennan Distinguished Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. But I think one of the most remarkable things is just the range of interests and expertise that you've accumulated over the years. Everything from like local politics in Russia to urban politics in the United States, Washington, D.C. And this book really showcases his depth of insight on the arts. I think you'll talk about it a bit, but I think the book is really, and the series, very revealing of, among other things, just Ukraine's diversity in so many ways, right? The diversity of art forms, a wide range of art forms are considered here. Different kind of ethnic backgrounds of the artists, regional diversity. The book covers developments in the arts in lots of different regions, certainly not just Kiev, but kind of ranging, from Kharkiv to Chernivtsi, to Lviv, what have you, to the Hutzul community. So I think it's just a really exciting and important work, and I think Blair will talk about kind of part of the motivation for this, I'm sure, I guess I'll let just him say that rather than try to summarize it, but let me just say thank you for joining us, and I've asked Blair to talk for maybe about half the session, and then we can have the rest of the time for discussion, and please feel free to go get some food or something if you have not already done so. Blair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I want to begin by thanking Henry for inviting me to speak today, and Kelly for making all the arrangements. It's a pleasure to be here. I also want to thank my former colleagues at the Kennan Institute and Wilson Center for supporting this project over its first 3 years. As you'll hear, it really came about because of the connection through Kennan. But I also want to thank my friends at the Center for International Theater Development in Baltimore, CITD, who stepped in immediately after DOJ closed down the Wilson Center, effectively closed down. There actually is a rump Wilson Center left, but effectively closed down the Wilson Center so that the series could continue. And finally, I want to thank the wonderful team at IBIDM Press in Germany and Columbia University Press here for bringing out the volumes. Before I say anything further, I want to make one point very clear. This really isn't my book, and these aren't my books. I simply reported on the inspiring work of Ukrainian artists in many fields, as Henry's noted, who immediately turned to their craft to resist Russian physical and cultural violence. This is their story, and it's really a book in a way by, and certainly about, the people in Ukraine who have undertaken the work that I write about. To begin, to give you a little bit flavor of what these essays are and what they aren't, I'm going to read one to you from volume 3, just to give you a sense of what I've been doing. So it's not sort of an abstract concept. This is from volume 3, it's essay 13, Stolen Spring but Not Stolen Humanity. And it was posted June 21st, 2024. Photographer Elena Grom has been fleeing Russian invaders for nearly a decade. Born in Donetsk, she trained and developed her technique in and around her native city. Hoping to have a career as a conceptual artist, she discovered that photography empowered her creative instincts. She quickly gained a national and international reputation, earning exhibitions and recognition as far away as Singapore, Colombia, and Canada. Then Putin's Little Green Man entered her hometown and with local collaborators claimed it to be part of Russia. Grom and her family made their way west, eventually settling in the Kiev suburb Bucha, and she set up a studio in neighboring Irpin. Her professional achievements continued with opportunities to show her work in Kiev as well as in galleries across Europe. Her career flourished. International photography juries began recognizing her work. Bucha and Irpin seemed a safe haven for her to pursue her creative life. But as we all know, Bucha, it turned out, was on the Russian route to Kiev. In February 2022, she and her neighbors stood in the way of a full-scale invasion. They would soon suffer almost total destruction, massacres, and other unspeakable war crimes. Grom managed to leave Bucha briefly, only to return after the Russians pulled out weeks later. Complete devastation and profound trauma became her reality as she and her neighbors began rebuilding their communities and personal lives as best they could. As she surveyed her town, she began to think about Michael Nash's photographs of the complete destruction of Warsaw at the end of World War II. Nash's work inspired Grom to turn her camera on the devastation surrounding her. As she began taking pictures, she noted that those who had survived were too preoccupied with reconstructing their lives to notice that spring had arrived. Flowers blossomed amidst the rubble. Birds flew in from their winter travels. Nature reaffirmed life in ways beyond human capacity. She hit upon the idea of contrasting the Russian destruction with nature's rebirth. She created studio-sized photographic backdrops showing spring scenes, bright flowers, babbling brooks, open fields, and set them up in front of the blackened, war-ruined urban landscape that became Bucha's reality. She invited neighbors to don their best remaining clothes and pose in front of these backdrops for her camera. The result is Stolen Spring, a series of portraits revealing both the horror of physical ruin and the hopes of spring and of her resilient neighbors who were setting out to rebuild their town. This project became her psychological salvation, even as she, her family, friends, and neighbors confronted some of the worst horrors of 21st century war. 2 years on, her powerful photographs have made their way out of Bucha via the internet and exhibitions around the world. The 15 jurors of the annual Fine Art Photography Awards were among those admiring her work. They awarded her twice during this year's competition, once as Professional Photographer of the Year, and also first place in the Professional Portrait category. Humanity often is lost as war grinds on. Grom's photography from Bucha and Irpin reveals that neither humankind nor nature disappear. A future with hope may be found in the sanctuaries of peace and springtime. So that's an example of what I tried to do. So how did these books come about? I want to talk about that. Then I want to offer a couple of general observations emerging from the works that I examined and wrote about. And then I'll close with some thoughts about the future. Well, I turned away from Ukraine when I stepped down as director of the Kennan Institute a dozen years ago. However, if I walked away from Ukraine, Ukraine did not walk away from me. About seven years ago, I was caught off guard when I was approached by scholars in Kiev concerning the possibility of publishing a Ukrainian translation of my 2017 book, The Muse of Urban Delirium. That translation came out in December 2021, and we began to plan a book tour of Ukraine for the summer of 2022. That process lured me back to Ukrainian affairs, most importantly through the lens of the arts. I began when the invasion began. I reached out to the arts community in Ukraine, the same people I had been dealing with about the book, and kept trying to figure out what was going on. And quite unexpectedly, I began hearing stories of artists using their talents to resist Russia. And importantly, this is a less visible part of the story, the efforts of the embattled Ukrainian government at all levels to embrace and support these efforts. I wrote a piece about Odessa for the Kennan Institute, and then a couple of more pieces, and soon we decided I might be onto something. And before I thought about it, I was writing a weekly blog post for the Kennan Institute about the response of the arts to the war. As Henry noted, in drawing up these posts, I purposely sought to move around among regions, art forms, and generations. I've also tried to bring in a little history as context because I assume many of the readers don't really know much about the places I'm writing about. The 3 volumes here contain 150 essays from the war's first 3 years. About 24 more have appeared with the Center for International Theater Development, and more are ready to go, and there will be a 4th volume next summer. So what insights have I gained about the war through this approach? Well, first, I think this story helps explain how a seemingly divided society coalesced so powerfully to defend a nation whose meaning had been contested. Over the past 35 years, young Ukrainians have grown up with no memory of the Soviet Union, secure in the notion that Russia is a different and an unattractive neighbor, and fluent in the Ukrainian language, even if they speak other languages at home. And they're drawn to the economic well-being and values of Europe. They've created a vibrant new Ukrainian culture and identity. The effervescent Ukrainian pop music and hip-hop scene, accompanied by sassy media and dynamic art, reflect a population that has chartered a fresh path following independence. It's that path that prepared people to do what I write about. And Ukrainian has been the language of that culture. Whether cultivated by official or commercial outlets, remember The Simpsons appeared in Ukrainian translation, not in Russian, on Ukrainian television, or through homegrown social media and other cultural firms, this culture has reinvigorated the Ukrainian language. Perhaps most importantly, this new culture has remained, first and foremost, fun and joyous. Far too often we as social scientists devalue the importance of fun and joy. We don't know how to problematize joy. And if we can't problematize something, then clearly it doesn't exist, at least at an analytical level. And because of that, I think we missed a lot of what was going on the ground in Ukraine. I'm guilty of that too. The second observation is that the stories presented here highlight the ways in which Ukrainians have long explored the meaning of their country and culture through the arts. This is an important point. In Ukraine, as in many societies where political and economic life excluded an other, the arts can be a powerful surrogate giving voice to the excluded. And this is where this work ties into my writing and research on DC, because the arts were precisely the forum for expression of views from hometown Washington before there was home rule. So these stories show the manner in which the arts and their creators have empowered Ukrainians to confront Russian aggression. Adaptable Ukrainians in every genre have kept creating no matter what the Russians have thrown at them. Ukrainian artists and their audiences seek out basements and street corners, bomb shelters and public squares, and concert halls and galleries to celebrate what it means to be Ukrainian. Russia understands the power of the arts and culture as well. The Russian war machine has attacked Ukrainian cultural and educational institutions unrelentingly from the earliest days of the war. It's bombed and pillaged theaters, libraries, and museums, and outlawed the Ukrainian language and conversation in areas it's occupied. It's striven to convince the world that there's no such thing as Ukrainian culture. These efforts have only made the Ukrainian artistic community more resilient. Like the children's game of whack-a-mole, every time the Russians bring the hammer down in one place, Ukrainians find a way to reassert themselves elsewhere. The essays in the third volume in particular highlight a broader trend line that I think has taken shape on the ground. Collectively, they tell a story of resilience and consolidation. As I set out in volume 3, the process of artistic creation has moved through stages: survival, resistance and resilience, and recently, consolidation. Survival was top of mind for the Ukrainian arts community, as for all Ukrainians, during the hours, days, and weeks following the 2022 Russian invasion. Cultural figures and institutions immediately set out to do what they could to help their country resist, while the demands of war shut down pre-war activities. Theaters and dance companies directed their costume departments to sew uniforms and camouflage and help make first aid kits. Puppet theaters set up programs to help traumatize children. Cultural institutions in Western Ukraine welcomed their counterparts fleeing Eastern Ukraine. Classical musicians in Kiev and Kharkiv performed in metro stations that had been converted into makeshift bomb shelters. Famous rock groups came together on YouTube to perform songs airing anger at the Russians. And street artists took out their spray cans and began painting poignant patriotic murals in city-states. These actions attracted unprecedented international collaboration to save Ukrainian achievement in a matter of days, artistic achievement. Now, as an aside, I don't really discuss the immediate response of the international heritage community to what was going on in these books, but it is important to note that the international preservation community immediately sprung into action within hours of the initial attack, building off of long-standing relationships with colleagues in Ukraine and drawing on lessons learned from such war-torn countries as Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. If you want to know more about that effort, I urge you to look at the impressive work of the Smithsonian and the University of Pennsylvania, because that's also a big part of the story. I'm only telling it a little piece of. Well, by the summer of 2022, the existential focus on survival transformed into a culture of resistance as everyone settled in for what looked like and has become a long war of attrition. A vibrant club scene returned to Kiev. The Lviv Organ Hall, taking advantage of its relatively safer location further from the front, started booking international touring classical musicians. The Lviv National Ballet staged full-length performances. And theaters and concert halls opened new seasons in accordance with the regulations of martial law. Their audiences had to be able to fit into their bomb shelters. The hours of performances were shifted. But more or less a full season for theaters and opera and ballet and classical theater was stood up by the autumn of 2022. The 2022 holiday season marked a turning point as puppet theaters in Kiev and Lviv mounted special shows, and holiday concerts in Kiev and Odessa attracted enthusiastic audiences. Each new production represented a statement of defiance to the Russian invasion. Collectively and individually, as chronicled in the first two volumes, Ukrainians proclaimed that they had a vibrant culture of their own, one that was thriving despite continuing Russian efforts to deny and destroy its accomplishments. The artistic trends of the third year mark a further evolution of the Ukrainian cultural scene. If arts focus on survival at the outset and resilience and resistance in the months beyond, already by the third year we see a consolidation of those achievements and a strengthening of the contemporary art scene. New institutions came into being. Kiev's Film.ua studios and Lviv's Jam Factory Art Center are proving capable of supporting work on their own and attracting work. International partners and funders such as the Goethe Institute, the British Council, and the Italian government are part of a robust global effort to support Ukrainian culture. And perhaps of greater significance is the fact that Ukrainian works are finding new artistic champions around the world. Ukrainian plays, to cite one example, appear regularly on the London stage and have enjoyed success as far away as Buenos Aires and Hong Kong. And there are more Ukrainian plays on American stages than ever had been the case in the past. So what clues do we find about the future of Ukraine in these stories? Well, I want to highlight three, and then I'll wrap up. Over the course of the war, Ukrainian culture has become more integrated within itself as it's come to transcend previous divisions. The war has mixed Eastern and Western Ukrainian artists in all fields, and as those in the East have moved west. And many others from different regions have found themselves abroad and have collaborated with one another. Ukrainian culture has become increasingly a Ukrainian language culture. That process really began in 2014 following the initial Russian invasion, but it's only intensified. Ukrainian culture also has become internationalized. It's become less provincial, more plugged into international creative circuits. And more of its works are performed abroad. The international community is paying far more attention to Ukrainian arts, both past and present, than ever before. However, I want to note that the boundaries of what constitutes Ukrainian culture are bound to be contested once the war is over. To what extent were those who were working during the Soviet period Ukrainian? To what extent do the new funding and other opportunities come from the West define Ukrainian culture as opposed to Ukrainians defining Ukrainian culture? To what extent do Jewish, Tatar, Polish, and of course Russian culture fit into whatever Ukrainian culture will become? These are extraordinarily complex and contested issues, and they're going to continue to be issues well into peacetime. Finally, at a more universal level, these stories reveal how art endures. It's politics and ego that are fleeting. I think there are lessons here for how we think about the role and function of culture more generally, especially in political and economic developments where the arts too often are ignored. I want to begin to close by reading one more essay to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the trends of the third year. This is the essay 27, Music Full of Light, and it appeared online October 18th, 2024. Odessan evenings in June can be stunning in peacetime, as the scent of generous flowering trees and plants unfolds over a city luxuriating in soft evening breezes off the Black Sea. A vibrant beach scene transforms as hedonistic nighttime clubbers replace daytime sun worshipers. Understanding why so many have passed through the city and proclaimed it to be extraordinary requires little imagination. This past June, alas, was not a time of peace. The Odessa Philharmonic, led by Hobart Earl, traditionally closes its season with a rousing celebration. But the orchestra's final concert this year, performed on the evening of June 14th, almost didn't take place, as air raid sirens sounded and the electricity went off just as the orchestra was warming up. The orchestra scrambled to use temporary generators to cast light on their music stands. Maestro Earl wondered how he could conduct a Brahms symphony in the dark. The phrase of the hour was "stay flexible," which is how Ukrainians keep going despite the travails that have beset them since the Russian invasion. Once the all clear sounded, the lights came back on and audience members had taken their seat. The orchestra began with a premiere of a haunting new work, Yevgeny Orkin's Elegy. Orkin composed the piece in memory of the Odessa victims of the current war. This somber, moving, and at times disturbing 8-minute reflection on the horror of loss in wartime begins with a momentary crash of cymbals before moving to a quietly sorrowful meditation on war's assault on the lyricism of peace. The orchestra and audience stood in silence at the end. Orkin's piece set a somber mood in a distinctly modern style. His life and career track with those of many other top Ukrainian musicians of his generation. Born in Lviv in 1977, he studied clarinet and composition in the Kiev Conservatory before seeking further training in the Netherlands. He kept a foothold in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian classical music scene, even as he pursued opportunities in Europe. He played his principal clarinet in the Kiev Camerata Ensemble during the early 1990s, while simultaneously co-founding the Open Lift project promoting contemporary music in Utrecht. Orkin began composing chamber symphonies, concertos for violin, piano, saxophone, clarinet, and operas. His chamber opera, The Fairy Tale of the Forest Kings, brought a Ukrainian fairy tale to the stage in Germany in 2023, while his Odessa Rhapsody earned him the European Music Prize, awarded by the Mayor of Berlin. The concert closed with a luxurious performance of Johannes Brahms' Symphony No. 2. Brahms composed this pastoral work during a summer sojourn in an Austrian mountain town. Now much beloved, Brahms warned his publisher that he had never written anything so sad. Concertgoers ever since have admired the gripping beauty found in the composer's self-proclaimed sense of melancholy. In the hands of Earl and his orchestra, the piece captured both the sorrow of this moment and the bucolic beauty of the exceptional city they call home. During the lead-up to the performance, the orchestra's website urged people to consider attending this concert, saying that Brahms' symphony is full of light, gentle melodies. You'll definitely like it and it will put you in a great mood with an incredible charge of energy, since the score would be like musical medicine, which is so necessary for all Ukrainians. An additional benefit, the audience will be able to listen to the world premiere of a Ukrainian composer and will be at the center of musical life in Ukraine. When Maestro Earl lowered his baton that evening and on the orchestra's season, it was before an audience steeped in both melancholy and beauty. The search for understanding of the human condition, shared identity and values, and creative expression, evident in all the stories I present, point to a Ukrainian contemporary culture that is programmed to resist and to sustain itself in the face of Russian onslaught. These cultural developments programmed Ukrainians to resist before the most recent invasion, and it's part of, not the whole, but it's part of the story of why so many people in the West have been surprised at the Ukrainian ability to continue. Ukrainians have created their own society and culture to be shared with other Ukrainians, and that culture will endure. Thanks.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll just ask an initial question, and then we can open it up to the group. I guess one question I had was about the roles that different art forms might be playing, right? Because you have everything from music, theater, painting, so on. I mean, did the artists you talked to, did they see themselves as, you know, say if it's a singer or a hip hop artist, see themselves as playing like particular roles that maybe someone who's setting up an art gallery, right, displaying paintings or photography or something like that, might have been envisioning themselves playing a different role. I wonder if you've had a chance to think about that, or if that came through at all in your conversations.
I think the impulse has been to use what it is that you yourself do to express to a broader Ukrainian and international community what's going on. I think the impulse has been to, well, like the photographer I wrote about, first off, it's self-healing. But secondly, it gives an opportunity to communicate what's going on to a wider audience. And do these processes bounce off themselves? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think also another factor in all of this has to do with what's required for an art form to be presented. I mean, Rom could take her photographs and put them on the internet herself. Just this past weekend, there was a premiere of a major new ballet in Lviv. It's the 125th anniversary of the Lviv Opera House, and it was a major international gala weekend. And of course, that requires a whole different level of expression. I think the street artists basically felt moved to try, take their spray cans and brighten up. They were clearly addressing a larger audience. I think people who are writing chamber operas are really just writing for a small community. So I think it's mixed. But I think what's shared is a universal compulsion to use what it is you know to give expression to a general sense of horror, melancholy, and also joy.
Mm-hmm. All right, terrific. Thank you. So let's open it up. Questions, reflections. So start with Volodya then.
Hi there.
And you can introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Thanks,
He knows who I am, but I'm Volodymyr Kulik, Kiev School of Economics, currently Petra Fellow here. So, given that you cover different regions of Ukraine, I wonder if you could help me understand if there is any Russian language culture left in Ukraine currently. I mean, there are requirements of the language law about performative arts, so you must include at least translation into Ukrainian, or it's better be Ukrainian from the beginning. Under this condition, and of course there is this indignation at Russia and flight away from Russianness. Under these conditions, is there any are there any manifestations of culture which retain the Russian language as the main language?
There are some. I wrote about a poet who wrote in Russian, and he insisted on continuing to write in Russian because he didn't want Putin to steal his language. Many prominent authors and playwrights began shifting from Russian to Ukrainian back in 2014. And there's one theater, I'm trying to think of what the performance was. Anyway, they put a warning out that there would be Russian songs in the performance to warn, kind of the audience ahead of time. I think it's I'm sure, particularly when it comes to writers, like the poet, that there are people who are continuing to write in Russian, but it's not, it's certainly not welcome. I think in Odessa, there's more of a Russian language presence, and there's more resistance to taking down monuments to Russian language authors. And this gets to my final point. I think looking forward, these are all issues that are going to have to be worked through, and it could be very painful. So I think there's some Russian language cultural creation that's continuing, but it's not as visible as the Ukrainian language, That's my sense.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, Marty.
Marjorie Mendelsohn Balzer, Georgetown University. Blair, I wanted to continue the conversation that was so interesting that we were having before this started, and that is the origins of your covers. Some of the ways in which the photographs were chosen and the iconographic importance behind them.
These are chosen by a woman in Kiev, a theater producer named Olga Diatl. And she's a producer, she's been involved in new Ukrainian opera and plays. And she has reached out to her colleagues in the theater community to come up with images that reflect the different stages which I just talked about. And I think these covers kind of do it. First, there's the emergency surgery on the Shevchenko monument. Then there's the actress sitting at a piano that has been hit by a Russian rocket. And I'll tell you a funny story, interesting story about that in a moment. And the final one is a war veteran going through a museum looking at exhibits about the war. And I think that that reflects what I just said, you know, survival, resistance, consolidation. We initially wanted, I'm not going to immediately remember the composer's name, but there's a performer who wrote a concerto for Ortegon rocket. And he played that missile by attaching strings to it. And it was at the St. Andrew's Cathedral in Kiev. And we wanted to get a picture of that, but this is the closest we can. But I mean, this is the kind of, there's a whole stage where artists, particularly sculptors, but not just, are creating art out of detritus of Russian war. And that was perhaps the most dramatic example.
Okay, great. Other comments, questions? Yes, please.
Blair, congratulations. I can't wait to read these, and your essays have been phenomenal. I hope you're selling these today because I want to take a bunch of them home and study them. But I'm Melinda Herring. I'm from Razum for Ukraine, and I've been lucky enough to go all over, not as many places as you have, since the big war started, and I was nodding my head along.
Well, let me just say something.
Yeah.
I haven't, that's part of the story, actually. I haven't actually gone.
You haven't gone?
No, this is all from here.
That's even more incredible. That's even more incredible. So I have a couple of things that I'm wondering if they sort of made their way into this. You talked a little bit about the need to create both as being an expression of what's happening to people and sort of the healing effect of it. And I think one of the best examples I've seen is Cultural Forces. I don't know if you've come across them. They're the Ukrainian equivalent of the USO. And they have about 12 different troops, and they're on the front lines, and they have the best opera singer in Ukraine who stepped at a landmine, and they call him Pavarotti. And he was at the Zaporizhia Opera before the war. They have an incredible rock star. They have the only country singer in Ukraine who's part of this group. They have puppeteers. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I was struck by their work, but also they have a violinist who played at Carnegie Hall. I mean, they have the best musicians. Who said the best way I can serve right now is using my musical instrument. But their poetry, I think, is one of the most interesting examples of something that you said. So a lot of art is being formed in the moment as they're going through this process. And they got a van, and they pulled the van up to as close to the front as they could. And as soldiers were going through this, living at the front line, this uncertainty, they told everyone, take a moment, go in the van and write down what you're thinking. So one of the really interesting pieces of the poetry scene is that Ukrainians on the front are writing very good poetry on their phones. So I'd love to connect you with these guys. Your point on the art museums being hit, I think really comes home to me in Odessa. I was there this year, and the National Art Gallery's been hit, and they took out all the good art, and the stuff that remains is not very good, but it's okay. It's still bringing people together, and it still functions as a really important part of the city. There's still a lot of people who are going and who want that sustenance. And last point, Lit Museum in Kharkiv is really interesting, and in the middle of the war, they're making new exhibitions. And to me, the interesting piece is, what are the exhibitions that don't have to do with the war? Because you could take a lot of photography about war images, but they have a brilliant museum on the city of Kharkiv, and I'll show you some pictures of it if you want to see it, but it's about the importance of everyone reaching out and protecting each other, and the sort of, if one building falls over, that it affects other people in the building, and it's this visual representation of the city, and it's really powerful. So I can't wait to read this. Congratulations. And I do have a question, not just a comment. So you have 1, 2, 3, and you've mapped it out brilliantly with survival, resistance, consolidation. What's stage 4? Is it consolidation 2.0, or is there something else coming?
I think consolidation 2.0 is there's a lot of maturation of some of the institutional arrangements that have taken place. For example, what I just mentioned about the Lviv Opera House, that could not have happened 3 years ago. And part of it has to do internally in Lviv. Part of it has to do with connections with the international community. The Metropolitan Opera in New York played a role in this gala, and so on and so forth. I think with theater, the regularization of the pipeline of new plays to London that had existed, but it's now really taken shape. So I think we're beginning to see institutional arrangements that will continue. But I'm going to go back to a couple of things you said. I didn't recognize the name cultural forces, but I have encountered the phenomena. And what's also interesting is that local commanders are encouraging people, artists as well. And there's a very charming story from, it will be in the 4th volume, of the local military district commander in Lviv, remembering how he loved going to puppet shows. So they're supporting the local puppet theater. And there are stories, some of the early street murals were basically funded by the army. And also, I think Ukrainian authorities increasingly see this as a kind of soft power as well. So they're we've seen the ballet companies come here and so on. But Kharkiv, it's an amazing story. What's happened in Kharkiv, and it can't escape the war. It's a place where I know colleagues who felt that it would never stand with Ukraine, and yet it's been through hell. And the university buildings have been damaged. The Kharkiv Opera has set up an auditorium underground. The art galleries. There was a major photography exhibit on the Kharkiv, late Soviet Kharkiv photography school that was in the Netherlands, but working closely to support the photographers in Kharkiv. It's an amazing story, and I think it's in a way the most dramatic story. I think artistically, probably the most interesting stuff is in Lviv right now, but they've had less so now, but they've had a little bit of breathing space. Kharkiv never had that. So I think one of the stories to be told when all this is over is what happened there. Why did it exist so vigorously? And probably having rockets fall on you is the main reason. But
Ivana Frankivsk actually has a really cool experimental theater. I would
Yes.
encourage you to look there.
Yeah,
I saw
yeah.
something there this summer, and they did it in a mix of, so it was a Polish play, but it was performed in Russian, and the whole audience was like, oh my God, why are they speaking that? So it was in Russian, and Putin was in it. It was a dramatic retelling of people's emotions, and then on the screens they had it in English and Polish. So it was a mix of languages, but you definitely don't hear very much Russian.
Yeah, well, Ivana.
Was there Ukrainian there?
It was a play in Ivana Frankivsk by their experimental theater.
No, I mean, was that Ukrainian translation?
Yeah, of course, of course.
But that theater and the people around it. I mean, one of the things that they did was they set up basically artist colonies for people from the East to continue, artists in the East to continue the work. That theater is particularly important. There's a wonderful Ukrainian music. Well, there are two new Ukrainian websites. The classical music one is based in Lviv, and the contemporary music one is based in Ivano-Frankivsk. And basically, you can go online and find any Ukrainian music written in those genres in one place. There's an app, a Ukrainian classical music app based in Lviv. And that's when I talk about how the culture is consolidated. There's a theater group. The theater community was, like all theater communities, often at war with itself. But they've now created kind of middle kinds of institutions to coordinate among theaters. So there's a lot of this work taking place. It probably wouldn't have taken place otherwise.
Okay, great. Yes, please.
Yes. It's been many years,
It's
so I
been
have
many
to reintroduce myself. Mary Kruger. I'm retired State Department, and I spent many years in Ukraine at the beginning of Ukrainian independence, and I spent a lot of time with Ukrainian artists then. And it's really great to hear these optimistic words about culture in Ukraine, not only from you, but comments also from others here, because the arts always were the soul of Ukraine. I'm going to ask you a question, though, and it's a little bit different because of the war, so many people have had to leave Ukraine, and they're basically refugees. They left not because of their own choice. And there are questions about how many of them may go back at the end of the war, because it'll be hard to go back. Do you know if there's communication between the artists in Ukraine and just ordinary Ukrainian refugees, not necessarily the ones who go to the London theater, but those who are scattered about Europe? Is there any way that this artistic expression will help them feel their Ukrainianness and want them to go back to Ukraine?
I think the answer is yes, and I don't totally know that part of the story, but I did spend time in Warsaw at a Ukrainian cultural center that grew up in the modern art museum, because it's right next to the train station, and they put up a big Ukrainian flag, and Ukrainian refugees found their way there, and they started, this was the temporary facility. The brand new museum is open, and I haven't seen that, but they were talking about trying to continue this. They supported kind of a Ukrainian culture club, and so they would show films, or they would have poetry readings, and it was really addressed at the Ukrainian refugee community in Warsaw. I don't know if that's continued, but I think that's an example of connections that are being made. I mean, obviously, Ukrainian artists abroad have a wide range of experience, but ballet dancers in Holland, young kids circus school performers in Budapest, they were taken in. There's a Ukrainian ballet company in Japan. Obviously, the longer people are out of the country, the more likely it is they're going to stay out of the country. But like people like the composer I read the piece about, go back and forth. So I think it is going to be hard for a lot of people to go back. I think the current international skepticism of refugees may drive people back. So I think I think there'll be a diaspora cultural community, but there'll be connections back and forth.
Okay, great. Yes. Okay. All right. Yes. First.
Thank you. My name is Ivan Christov. I'm from Bulgaria. I'm a visiting scholar here, and would like to ask you. You mentioned about the puppet theater, but how children are engaged with art there in Ukraine.
there are a number of programs for kids. The puppet theaters have really risen to the occasion. But there are programs in the arts, in schools, I think the short answer is yes, but I'm sure there's a more complicated answer. But artists themselves musicians have reached out to kids in the music community. The Odessa Opera House has a wonderful program that has continued for kids to spend a day at the Opera House. So yeah, I think it's a little bit hit or miss, but it's there. And the story of the puppet theaters is something we don't really talk about much, but the major Lviv and the Kiev puppet theaters in particular, but also the one in Odessa, really have been active in trying to help kids come to terms with trauma. So maybe you know more about this.
In Kharkiv, there's a beautiful, I can pull the name of it, but a beautiful gallery that's a little bit underground, and it's painted in the style of Bosch, and it's remained open the entire time, and it's for mentally handicapped children. But it's this beautiful, vibrant style, and they have floor-to-ceiling murals, and they've taken those murals and put them all over the Kharkiv metro. So it's a way, since so many kids were down in there, and many of the metros, many of the schools have gone underground, it's a way of integrating the kids and telling them that everything's going to be okay.
Harley?
Thank you. Harley Balzer, Georgetown University, and most recently co-editor of a book called Failure, Russia Under Putin. And Blair's given us a nice example of some of the important failures. One quick footnote on the returnees. The longer people stay away, the less likely they are to go back. But the ones who spend 5, 10, 12 years in another country develop international connections that makes it really important when they do go back. Yeah. And that can make a big difference. But I know you don't really want to talk that much about Russia anymore, but I was struck, and I've read most of the 3 volumes, and I didn't quite put together what you put together at the end, but those of us who have been still communicating a lot about and with Russians, for me, I'm struck, the Russians have been driving me crazy talking about how normal life has been. That's been changing a little bit in the past year with interruption of internet and airports and a few other things. But the cultural change you're describing in Ukraine is so different from the Russians insisting that everything is normal that kind of makes me even more optimistic about Ukraine post-war. The last cultural program Putin announced got 1.5% participation. The Russians seem to be getting more fragmented as the Ukrainians, in your description, seem to be coming together more. And that could be a very interesting factor.
And I think it's not only that they're coming together, I think for the most part,
consolidating
a culture that is looking to be integrated into a broader world.
Yeah.
And that's part of the story about whether or not people go back. But, you know, the Ukrainian youth culture right now, Berlin is its mecca.
Yeah.
I purposely not engaged a lot with Russia in the last couple of years. But what I see, at least on the surface, is the continuing and even elevated Russian preoccupation of Russia being different from any place else on the planet. And that may create some remarkable cultural sparks, but in general, it seems to me to be a dead end. But that's just my take on it.
I mean, the alternative is China, and that's not that attractive to most people.
All right, I think we have time maybe for one more question, comment. Yes, please.
Me, right?
Yes.
My name is Valentina Riznik, and I work in politics in Ukraine, and I have 2 questions. The first one, As we know, Russia likes to use different methods to impact on something, especially on a culture. During your researches, have you noticed any trying from their side to impact on Ukrainian culture? And the second one, if you get the invitation to Ukraine, would you come?
We can talk about the second one separately. It's actually a little complicated, but yeah. Well, I haven't really looked at what the Russians have been doing in the areas that they've occupied, but it does seem to me they have, what has popped on my radar screen is the banning the Ukrainian language, the elevation of Russian media. I haven't sensed, there undoubtedly have been Russian efforts to make a positive reach, but a lot of it seems to me to be trying to squash what's coming up from below. The Russians are trying, I think, internationally to get themselves back on the international cultural scene. Some of the issues in London about opera singers, for example. But I don't, the Russians have been pretty heavy-handed. This may be my reaction. Are they trying? Sure, certainly they're trying through social media and all that. We know that. We know Russian disinformation. But what they're trying to do culturally, particularly in Ukraine, I'm not sure. I do know, I've heard that some of the backlash in Odessa about taking down monuments has been prompted a little bit by Russian disinformation. But I'm also confident that there are a lot of people in Odessa for whom Babel is a great local author, no matter what language he wrote in. So I think they're probably trying to play that card, but there's a card there to be played. My general sense is, even if they tried, Russian culture is being pretty much rejected throughout Ukraine. I mean, I go back to the theater, the play, I think it was Heroes of Kiev or something. It's a play that takes the broad sweep of Kiev history, and some of the characters and moments in that are in Russian, and they had to put up a warning sign. There's Russian in this performance. I mean, you start bombing and killing people doesn't help advance your cultural reach.
Because I would like to add that they using sometimes, this is what I noticed, they using the bloggers, yes, which are trying to return Russian music, they like saying, oh, that's fine, that's okay, it doesn't matter, and so on. So they trying to get back this like nostalgia, yes, to people. But it works sometimes, but sometimes it really like people are blowing. So sometimes they still trying, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work now.
Yeah, I think they probably have had more success outside of Ukraine in the West, frankly. I mean, how dare you? We still play the 1812 Overture every 4th of July. We're clueless about the history of that piece, totally clueless about it. We just like the canons. Right? Yes. I mean, these are complicated issues. They're going to, I mean, those great 19th, early 20th century Russian composers have a place in the musical canon that probably isn't going to go away. And several of them, like Stravinsky, had very strong Ukrainian ties anyway. So these are issues, but I think it's going to take peacetime to work through them.
Thank you.
All right, just before we wrap up, I want to say if we have any students here, please come over to find Kelly, because we'll have a little lottery raffle for a free copy of the books. But please join me in thanking Blair for, well, first of all, congratulations for an amazing set of books, and thank you so much for sharing your reflections.
Let me say one word about, we did attempt to have them for sale here, they're not. But Columbia University Press, just go to their website, and they're on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But Columbia University Press is the publisher.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bravo.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. I was just asking, you answered it.
It's a